Hello, folks. It's a bunch of malarkey when you go into the garage and you smell gas. You see gas on your tires or your track, you got a leaky carburetor. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how to fix a leaky carburetor. Now, most of the times this is simple. I don't like to jinx it, but most of the cases that I've worked on is usually pretty simple cases why it's leaking. Now, I usually ask the owner, what's the last thing you did to the carburetor? Did you take it off? Did you do an in-frame cleaning? Did you remove the bowl or sediment cup to work on it? Usually that's a clue. Or you just left the fuel on. And what usually happens, it usually don't happen with the newer Hondas, but with the older ones, if you leave the fuel on, it could overflow. The bowl could overflow and either flat out your engine or you're gonna see gas leaking. So that's why I always tell people, get in the habit of shutting off your gas valve between uses, okay? Follow the instructions on the control panel. It tells you how to turn on the Honda, shut it down and everything. But let's go through the simplest. I always say this, and you folks know this, I always say, go with the simplest things first before you panic and think you need an engine overhaul because your carburetor is leaking gas. So what I usually do is I try to find out where it's leaking from. I'll feel the hose from the fuel tank down to the carburetor, eyeball the ends to see if they're split. That's usually a very rare occurrence in my experience. If I see fuel leaking from here, it might be the sediment cup. Usually it's leaking from the bowl. Usually it's from a bad connection or a bad O-ring on your bowl. So what I'll do, I'll remove you don't have to remove the carburetor, okay? I just took this old carburetor off for demonstration purposes. I removed the sediment cup, and I can use my pick and get the old O-ring out. Sometimes there's no O-ring. If you were working on it, sometimes the O-ring falls off, and that's your problem. I look at the O-ring, see if it's cracked or dried or whatever. That's why when you're working on your carburetor, you should have a gasket set in stock. It has everything you need for your carburetor. This is a GX240 8 horsepower engine. This is about $12 US dollars. It comes with the bowl O-ring, your sediment cup O-ring. It comes with different it's got your little O-ring for your idle jet. It's got a couple other gaskets and nylon washers for your mountain bolt or your drain bolt. Okay, so it's just good to have. You might only need one part of it this time. Next time you might need another part. So it's a good investment to have one of these in stock. So I'll check the O-ring. I'll take off the bowl. I'll check the O-ring on the inside here. I usually don't take it out. I just check it out to see if it could be leaking from there. On some carburetors, you want to put on the bowl correctly so it lines up with your float. You'll see an indent on the inside of your bowl, and you want to make sure it lines up. Now, if it's not the O-rings and it's overflowing, I forgot to mention that you should shut off the fuel and drain your bowl before you take this off so you don't make a mess. And I always keep a fire extinguisher or a blanket handy. Anytime you're working with gasoline, you want to have a fire extinguisher or a blanket, in case you have an accident. So I take off the float. Well, first of all, what you can do is you can turn the fuel on and you can see if the float is turning off the fuel. Now, here's, I already took the pin out. But what I'm trying to show you, Here's the normal position of the float when there's no fuel in the bowl. And as the bowl fills up, this float flattens out. And when it gets to a certain point, the flatness, it should shut off your fuel flow. If it's not shutting off the fuel flow, most likely it's dirt inside the needle seat. Here's the needle. It's hard to show here, but there's a rubber needle. I check to see if there's any damage to it or any dirt to it. Usually there's a speck of dirt. It only takes a speck of dirt that's smaller than a grain of sand that can cause your carburetor to overfill. So what I do, I take some carburetor spray and I'll spray it. Watch your eyes now. I always use eye protection. I'll spray some up there. I'll even do an in-frame cleaning. I'll put a link to that video at the end of this one. You know, once you know, it's not off the machine, but you can do an in-frame cleaning while it's on the machine. So you might as well do it. You've got the time. Spray some carburetor spray up here. But if the culprit is a fuel flow and when it shouldn't be, I'll take a Q-tip and I'll put it up here and spin it around and try to clean it out. And then I'll flush it out again with some more carb spray. Now, I watch some YouTubers do this. They'll put the Q-tip in a drill and put it up here. I've never had to do that with a Honda carburetor. Most Honda carburetors, unless they've got rust and corrosion, they're fairly easy to clean out and get going again. So I'll clean that out. I'll flush it out again. I'll reinstall the float, and before I put the bowl back on, I'll test the float. I'll put the gas on, put a container underneath to catch the fuel. I'll turn the fuel back on, and I'll watch the fuel flow. It should be a steady stream of fuel, but when you push up on put your float back in, okay, and then you flatten out that float, it should stop the flow of gas. Now that may be your problem. So once I do that, once I figure out that it's working, I'll shut off the fuel. I'll put the bowl back on. I'll put it all back together, okay? In very, very rare cases, I've only seen this maybe 3 times out of like 300 or 400 carburetors. There may be a worn out part inside your fuel shutoff valve. Now your kit comes with that part. It's right here. There's a 4-hole part here. And that's for the inside of your fuel valve. Now you have to be very careful. When you take the top off of the fuel valve, you want to take a picture and you make sure you put the parts on correctly. They go on a specific way. Okay, so you got to be careful. I had a friend of mine, he put the part in wrong, and then this was locked up. He couldn't get it to work, so we had to take it apart. It only took a few minutes. Take it apart, and then we had to turn the part over. This is a metal. It's a metal spring type of part. Put it on the other side, and we put the new 4-hole gasket in there, washer or whatever it's called. And then it stopped leaking. But that's very rare. I'm just trying to go over the simple things. You got your sediment cup O-ring. You got your bowl O-ring. You clean out the needle seat. Okay. In some cases, it could be the fuel line. Some of these fuel lines, they get old and they start cracking or whatever. Very rare. I've seen it, very rarely. But you just go from the simplest things first and move yourself up, and you'll get it. I've fixed, repaired, 100 different Honda carburetors with fuel leaks. It's usually simple. Just think to yourself, what's the last thing I did? You know, if you messed with the carburetor, you probably just have to go back to square one, and check everything over again. Or if you left the fuel on, maybe there's a speck of dirt, you know, in the needle seat or the needle. That's another rare thing too. The needle very rarely get damaged on these. I've seen it on the older machines. So that's about it. You know, it's fairly simple to do in most cases. You know, sometimes it might be something more serious. But I'll put a link to the in-frame carburetor cleaning so you don't have to take the carb off, okay? So that's my tip for the day. It's a very, very popular video all over the internet, is leaky carburetors. So if this has helped you, please like and subscribe. Check out some of our other videos and check out our Facebook group, Honda Snowblower Enthusiast, online. And thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.